Welcome everyone. I apologize for missing class on Thursday. I was feeling sick, so I recorded this PowerPoint lecture for you to watch at your convenience. We talked about the sociological imagination and we did a little activity on Tuesday whereby we discussed how larger social factors influence us as individuals, our behaviors, our attitudes, emotions, our socioeconomic outcomes. Today I want to talk about sociology and our primary perspectives and methods. Sociology is a broad discipline. Some people say it's the study of society. I think of it more as the scientific study of people, humans, and our patterns of behavior, patterns in terms of the attitudes or the viewpoints that we have, patterns of emotions, patterns of economics and politics. So I see sociology as essentially the same thing as social science. They're usually used as basically the same thing. Now there are three main perspectives that we're going to be talking about throughout the entire semester. You should get to know early on. The first one is called functionalism. And what do we mean by perspective? What I mean by that is that rather than us using our individual lenses and our individual ways of thinking about things, we're going to use these lenses to think about different aspects of society. Functionalism maintains that society is like a biological organism made up of interrelated parts that work together, kind of like this image of the human body. Each portion of the body has a function. The lungs, the spleen, the liver, the intestines. Everything has a job to do in order for the body to function in a healthy way. Now, some of you may have heard that when someone loses their eyesight, their hearing gets sharper. Their other senses make up for the fact that they cannot see like they used to. That's kind of the idea of functionalism, is that society is always trying to get into balance. If something is not working well, given enough time, something will rise up to help balance it out. So for example, early in this country's history, you had a lot of extended families living together. But when the Industrial Revolution came around, you needed mobile nuclear families to move around from city to city, wherever the jobs happened to be. So there wasn't necessarily room for grandma and grandpa. This created a problem in society. If grandma and grandpa aren't going to be moving around all over the country, what do? Well, we came up with the idea of retirement communities and nursing homes. That's a pretty new invention in human history. In some cultures, they don't even have nursing homes or retirement communities because the elderly stay with the family for their entire lives. Another example would be juvenile justice system. At some point in the United States, we realized that we have a lot of crime committed by people who are underage. We weren't sure what to do about it. There was an imbalance in society. And so the idea was that we would create a juvenile justice system to address this. It's all about getting back into balance, according to this perspective. Kind of like putting the pieces together of a puzzle for the betterment of society. Second major perspective is called conflict theory. And according to this perspective, society is composed of groups competing for scarce resources. Those resources could be money, wealth, good jobs, good education, good health care, vacation time, respect. So according to this perspective, you have all these different groups in society that want these things. These groups could be different racial or ethnic groups competing for these jobs and money. It could be different genders competing for these jobs and money and other resources. It could be different religions. It could be people of different social classes, the poor and the working class, the middle class and the upper class, all competing for their piece of the pie. And our third main perspective is called symbolic interactionism. According to this major perspective, if you want to understand society, you need to understand the symbols that people use. If you look at some of these symbols right now, you'll recognize a lot of them. So this one here is recycling. This one would be disabled parking. This is no smoking. This one's food available here. So through our upbringing, our socialization in the society, we learn these various symbols. We also learn language as a symbol. We learn the meaning of different types of clothing, the way we do our hair, the symbolism of music and television and movies. So a lot of anthropologists, which is one of our subfields, cultural anthropology, a lot of anthropologists like to use this symbolic interactionist perspective. Here's a great example. This is a red light, of course, and you also, of course, know that this means stop. But it really, in its essence, it's just a red light. But if you saw this same red light in a different context, like here, it would mean something different. It might mean pull over, or it might mean emergency. Or here, in a red light district, this red light could mean prostitution, or drugs are available here. So think about the fact that these are three different red lights, but in three different social contexts, they mean three different things. Here's another symbol. Now, we all have different perspectives of what this might mean. To some people, it means Southern heritage, Southern pride. To other people, it means slavery, it means torture, it means racism and discrimination. Who gets to decide? Well, here I put kind of this red box here and this blue box here because it's kind of conflict theory, but it's kind of symbolic interactionism. You have these different groups competing about the meaning of this flag. And we see the same thing with President Trump's Make America Great hat. For some people, it means national pride. To other people, it means racism and closed-mindedness. Who gets to decide? Now, another symbolic interactionist way of thinking about things, which I find really fun and interesting, is the idea that the way we perceive reality is socially constructed. I hope you remember this term, socially constructed. You'll hear it in a lot of your classes. It's the idea that as we go through our everyday lives, we reinforce ideas of what is normal, what is deviant. We're all participating in this little dance, just like in this famous painting. We're all in our little worlds, going about our business, but what we're really doing is we're constructing and reconstructing reality. And I want to give you a bunch of examples that I think you'll find interesting. I actually had this poster at one time because I think it's really interesting. This represents the idea that at one point, many people thought that the world was flat. They thought that if you went far enough out into the oceans that it wasn't just a waterfall, you would literally fall off the edge of the earth and perhaps drift into the nether space or wherever. This was a terrifying thing for many people around the world. Now, based on science, we know that the earth is round, although there are some people who still believe the world is flat. This is a construction of reality. Human beings, many human beings, used to think that the earth was the center of the universe. Why did they think that? Because when you're standing outside and you're looking at the sun or the stars, it looks like they're revolving around you, around planet Earth. It kind of makes sense. But as our science has gotten better, we now understand that the sun is actually the center of our solar system, and that there are many solar systems in the universe. But this was a construction of reality for many people. These lines that we draw here, we call them states. It almost seems like they've been around forever, but they really haven't. People have fought over these various lines. They will not stay like this forever. They will change at some point for one reason or another. But we pretend these things are real. So when you are driving down 75 through Georgia and you're going into Florida, right about here, do you get excited when you see that sign in the palm trees saying, "Welcome to Florida"? A lot of us do. We get really excited. We're in a different state right now. But it's really imaginary. We've made it up. It's not real, but we pretend that it's real. A lot of people go to this spot right here where you can stand in 4 states at the same time. It's a tourist spot. People get very excited, they take selfies, and they pretend this is a real thing. If I was to ask you what's wrong with this map, some of you might say, well, it's upside down. But is it really upside down? Is there really an up or down on planet Earth? The fact is, just about all of us have been taught to view the Earth, the map, the other way, with Canada and the United States on top, and Africa and South America and Australia on the bottom. But there are some cultures that actually use this map. There's no right or wrong. It's just one way of viewing it. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever seen a picture like this, when you're looking out at all these different solar systems, galaxies, is there really an up or down in the universe? No. There's also religious constructions of reality. Many of you have taken classes or heard about the many ancient Roman gods or Greek gods, Zeus and Aphrodite. We don't hear as much about the many African gods, such as I've shown here. So in many cultures historically, they have been polytheistic, many gods. Right now, it's very popular to think about one god instead of many gods. Here is a painting. The artist here has drawn heaven and hell, and here's kind of a middle area called purgatory, where you're kind of stuck in the middle. For many people, this is their reality, that if you are a sinner and you don't repent, you're going to spend eternity in a fiery place called hell, and it's going to be torture for eternity. However, if you're a good person or you repent for your sins, you'll go to this wonderful place called heaven, where you will be perhaps with your loved ones, and it will be this blissful place that you will stay in for eternity. And a lot of people have this construction of reality, that there is this one omnipotent, omniscient God that knows everything, is all powerful, and he's watching all of us, and he's monitoring all of our thoughts at all times. For many people, this is everyday reality. Why? Because this is what they have been taught. This is part of their culture. Had they been raised in a different culture, they would likely think about things much differently. What we considered sexual or physically attractive is socially constructed. The idea that female breasts are sexy or erotic body parts is socially constructed. In many cultures, female breasts are not considered erotic body parts. Just like in many cultures, male breasts are not considered erotic body parts. In some cultures, men dress up in makeup and jewelry to impress the women. Men are on display, hoping to win the affections of women, like in this picture here. In many cultures that you're probably familiar with, though, it's often women wearing makeup and more jewelry and adornments. This is all socially constructed. It all depends on when and where you were born. In some cultures, being heavier, being wider is considered sexier. A lot of paintings from the Middle Ages are of women who are larger. That was considered sexier. There are cultures right now where it is considered much sexier for women to have larger hips and larger thighs and waists. Some cultures have what's called a fattening hut, where a woman will go in and drink as much milk as possible over 30 days so that she can get as heavy as possible, because that's considered highly attractive. This is all socially constructed. Some of you may have heard of Chinese foot binding. This was common in China until not too long ago, whereby young women, teenage girls, would have their feet bound, taped up, so that their toes were crushed in the front, and they essentially had these hooves. This was considered very attractive for the girls and women, And there's historical record where men are writing about how sexy they find these feet. There's record of men kissing these feet. In our cultural context, most people would not find this particularly attractive. What is considered deviant or normal is socially constructed. Rock and roll music, R&B music, was considered the devil's music by some not that long ago. The great blues artist Robert Johnson, Big Mama Thornton, who sang Hound Dog before Elvis, Little Richard, one of the great architects of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, the Beatles. This was considered the devil's music. Now today, when most people listen to this music, it's considered pretty safe. It's kind of cute music. Most people wouldn't consider this dangerous music, but there were actually record burnings around the country whereby religious leaders would have their followers buy or find these albums, and they would have these burning parties where they would burn the albums, which is ironic because it made the artists more money because people went out and bought the albums just to burn them. But it was considered deviant by many at the time. What we eat at certain times of the day is socially constructed. Most people would think of this as breakfast food, but in some cultures you don't eat eggs for breakfast. You would only eat eggs for dinner. In fact, if you think about it, these are some really unhealthy foods to start your day off with. Greasy bacon, greasy sausage, high cholesterol eggs, white bread with butter. It's really unhealthy if you think about it. In some cultures they eat bugs. I spent some time in China and I saw basically shish kebabs like this, bugs on a stick that they would sell in carts. And there's a lot of protein you can get by eating these bugs. A lot of people in the United States might think this is gross, but in some cultures it's perfectly normal. What we consider valuable, this piece of paper that so many of us want to have in our pockets. Really, that's what it is. It's essentially cotton, it's ink, you have different colored dyes, red, blue, green. You might have some counterfeit strips in here, but at the end of the day, really, it's just paper. It doesn't really have value unless we give it value, and that's what we've done. We've socially constructed the idea that this has value, so I can trade this piece of paper in for something useful, like a pen or pencil. I can actually use a pen or pencil to write down my thoughts or write a poem or a song. That's useful. This piece of paper is not really useful. If we all decided that this piece of paper doesn't have any more value anymore, it wouldn't have any value. We have to pretend that it does. That's social constructionism. Gold and silver, these things are not inherently valuable. We pretend that they're valuable. We give them value. Sometimes gold is more valuable than silver. Other times silver has been more valuable than gold. These things change over time. Some of it depends on availability. If there's more gold, maybe it's not as valuable. Diamonds, rubies, it's all socially constructed. One of the dirty secrets of the diamond industry is that there are actually tons and tons of diamond mines around the world. There's no shortage of diamonds. But the companies that own and purchase all these diamond mines, they only release a small portion of the diamonds. The reason is because if they released all the diamonds, the value would plummet. They really wouldn't be worth that much. People wouldn't pay hundreds or thousands of dollars for diamonds if all of the diamonds were released to the public. When you're done listening to this, I'd ask you to go online and do an internet search for diamond monopoly, and you'll see some articles about this very thing. I remember in high school reading about the explorers going around the world looking for things like spices, things like clove right here, silk, ginger, allspice, cinnamon. And if you think about it, it's kind of weird because now you can go to the dollar store and buy these things very cheaply. They're not considered super valuable. But at the time, people would kill each other for some cinnamon. People would kill each other over pepper or salt or cloves because they were considered extremely valuable at that time. But now there's plenty of cinnamon and salt and pepper, so they're very, very cheap. It's all socially constructed. That new car smell that so many of you like. A lot of you have been in a new car. Maybe you've had the opportunity to purchase a new car, or your family has, and you get inside and it's got that smell, and a lot of people love that smell. Well, actually, that smell is toxic. It's plastic, it's chemicals, flame retardant chemicals. So, in other words, that smell that so many people have associated with as success, personal achievement, it's really the smell of toxicity. But many of us have been taught that that's a good smell. In fact, you can actually buy little pine trees that smell like new cars, or you can buy this spray to make your car smell like it's new. But these are very unhealthy smells. A lot of us think of lobster and steak as food for rich people, very fancy food. But not that long ago, lobster was food for poor people. There were so many lobsters, they were so easy to catch, and they're kind of hard to get at. If you've ever eaten lobster, they're difficult to get to the meat. So it was considered food for poor people. Rich people, meanwhile, used to eat chicken. That was considered upper class. Think about how that's flipped now. Now chicken is really cheap. You can buy a lot of chicken very cheaply at a lot of grocery stores, and a lot of poor and working class people eat chicken. Meanwhile, a lot of wealthy people eat lobster. It's all socially constructed. Now, finally, I want to talk briefly about doing sociological research. So we talked about different perspectives, how sociologists think about things. I also teach a class called Sociological Research Methods. Sometimes this class is called Social Research Methods or Social Science Research Methods. It's all the same thing. And here's some of the key ones we're going to talk about. Why do we have them? Well, how do you know what you know about society, about the world? Most of us know what we know based on the way we were raised, our family, our friends, maybe our religious leaders, things we've seen in the media, maybe even the education system. And sometimes that information is good, it's reliable, but a lot of times it's not. So your family might have some strong opinions about race or social class or gender. Are they experts on it? Do they spend their lives studying it? Well, that's what sociologists and other social scientists do. We actually spend our lives studying a lot of different aspects of society. We do it every day. We read the latest research. We read all the books and all the articles so that we know about these specific issues. Religious leaders often have biases. Sometimes they can be trusted, sometimes they can't. Media can oftentimes be incorrect, as we all know. Even the education system sometimes is wrong. Your teachers don't know everything. I don't know everything. At the university level, your professors are experts in certain areas. I'm not an expert on every aspect of society. That would be impossible, but there are some things that I am considered one of the leading experts in the country in, because I spend a lot of time and conduct a lot of research on it. Even firsthand experience can be problematic, which sounds weird, I know, but I want to give you an example. If after class on Tuesday you're walking outside and you happen to see a Native American stealing an automobile, and you can tell by the way the person is dressed, the way they look, that they are Native American. Later that night, you're talking to your family and friends and you say, you got to watch Native Americans because they're all stealing cars. Make sure you lock up your cars. What's the problem with that? You did see a Native American stealing a car. That's your firsthand experience. The problem is you're generalizing it to a wider population. For all you know, that could have been the only Native American who stole a car the entire year. Or, on the other hand, maybe it is a problem. Maybe there are Native Americans stealing a lot of cars. In sociology, what we care about is the data. We just want to know the facts. So you can't generalize based on limited experience. That's the problem with first-hand experience. So what are our methods that we use? One is direct observations, pretty straightforward. There's a couple ways we do this. Participant observation, non-participant observation. We watch people. So I've conducted research like this. I spent 2 years at an American Legion Veterans Post and surveyed and interviewed veterans, watched them, participated in their various activities. 2 years I spent doing this type of research for one publication. I have a colleague who she wanted to study roller derby, so she actually became a roly derby participant. And she would also often show up for class with bruises and black eyes from getting beaten up while she was doing this. Then she wrote her dissertation on this. So she's actually participating while she's observing. The other style would be non-participant observation. So here you're not actually participating, you're just watching from the background. If you're interested in studying the homeless, maybe you go to a homeless shelter. You might participate, serve food, you might hang out with the homeless perhaps, or maybe you don't. Maybe you just sit back and you're watching and taking notes. One of the strengths of this method is you really get to know people well. You earn their trust because you're spending a lot of time with them. One of the weaknesses is that this is not the greatest method for large groups. If you wanted to study VSU students, this would be difficult because there's, I think, 11, 12,000 VSU students. How are you going to participate with all the students? So this is really a good method for smaller groups, but not a good method for larger groups. Sociologists are probably most well known for surveys. Everybody's using surveys these days. It used to be just sociologists, but now news organizations are doing sociological surveys. There's a couple key terms that you should know. One is population, one is sample. Population doesn't necessarily mean the entire population of the United States. It could mean, it's basically just the group that you're interested in studying. So if you wanted to know VSU students' attitudes about same-sex marriage, would you be able to talk to all 12,000 VSU students? Probably not. You're interested in that population, but you just don't have the time, and some people aren't going to participate or respond. So what you do is you get a small subset of VSU students called a sample. You can't talk to 12,000, but maybe you can talk to 300. Maybe you can survey 500, maybe 1,000. There's closed-ended surveys where you have to choose from pre-designated answers like this one. Are you male, female? What is your present marital status? Are you presently employed? Yes, no, you have to choose from these. The upside to these is that you get very clear information and you can get good statistics from this. You could say 32.4% said never married, 48.6% said married. And so when you're reporting the information, it's easier to report back because you can give very clear percentages. The downside of closed-ended questions is it's not good for questions that require nuance. So if you were to ask somebody about their views on abortion, closed-ended surveys are not really great because a lot of people have very nuanced answers to that. They might think abortion is okay in this scenario, but not in that scenario. If the person is raped, it's okay, but not. So it's not impossible, but it would be more difficult to get an understanding of people's attitudes on abortion from a closed-ended survey. So a lot of times we might ask an open-ended survey question where it's more open-minded. It's kind of like an interview question, basically a little bit shorter than an interview. What are your views on abortion? What makes you feel unsafe on campus? What do you like about your job? Another positive aspect of this is that they might tell you things that you weren't expecting in your closed-ended survey. So if you weren't thinking about something, you wouldn't include it necessarily in your closed-ended survey. So those are the strengths and weaknesses. Interviews, they're kind of like open-ended survey questions, except there's follow-ups. So you're talking with somebody, having a conversation, and you're constantly asking for clarification of what they mean. Interviewing is actually a real skill. People have a lot of information in their heads, and it takes a really good interview to be able to get the information you want from people. So asking the appropriate follow-up questions, or what did you mean by that, or can you explain, or can you give an example about, let me see, applicants applicants with white-sounding names were 50% more likely to be called in for a job interview. In other words, just by having a white-sounding name, you were more likely to be called in for a face-to-face interview. So that's one of my favorite studies because it shows that there are biases out in the job market. And this is the real world. These were real jobs that were really applied for, and those were the real responses. So those are the different theoretical perspectives. I'm going to end this now. I will see everybody on Tuesday. If you have any questions about this, shoot me an email or talk to me on Tuesday.